Tornadoes of Accidents, Finding Peace in Tragic Car Accidents by Yong Hui V, McDonald. Part 1, Chapter 1. It's been almost 4 years since I lost my husband. I thought I was done with my books on grief and loss, but the Lord has led me to write another, guiding me step by step to gather other people's stories for this book. He convinced me that there are many who are hurting because of car accidents, and they can get help through other people's stories. We need to be prepared for death at any time while remembering that God's grace is sufficient. Difficulties in life that throw us into turmoil, grief, and pain are called tornadoes. Losing a loved one is a devastating tornado to go through, but it happens to most all of us if we live long enough. Sometimes it happens without warning, like a car accident. Any accident that can cause death or injuries is a tornado of life. I was in tornadoes of grief and pain caused by 2 accidents, my younger sister, Yong Hui, and her death and the passing of my husband, Keith. Their deaths threw me into a whirlwind of turmoil, and I was hurting from loss. However, it taught me many lessons about what others are going through. I have more compassion now because of what I've gone through. I also discovered God's healing power and love in the midst of hurt and pain. If you're affected by an accident and are hurting, I pray that you will find encouragement and healing as you read the stories in this book. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 1. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 2. While I was grieving, I couldn't help others because I was suffering from multiple triggers and couldn't function. After God healed me, I was able to resume my writing project. I always wanted to write a book on grieving to help others because I have met so many grieving people in my ministries at the jail and at the hospital. But I wasn't able to do it until I lost my husband. God can use our tears and painful stories to bring healing to others when we share our journey of how God brought healing to us. To help others who are grieving, God directed me to write a book, Dancing in the Sky, a story of hope for grieving hearts, about how God brought healing from the loss of my husband. This was something I had not planned to write, but because of God's leading hands, I was able to write it. While I was working on my book, the Lord gave me the heart to reach out to others who were also grieving my husband's death. Keith was the pastor of Community United Methodist Church in Keansburg and James Memorial UMC in Hudson, Colorado. I had many good friends from my husband's 2 churches, and they helped me tremendously, but many of them were grieving and in need of healing. Reverend Dawn Marie was the new pastor of my husband's 2 congregations. I visited her and told her how God brought healing in my heart, and that I was working on a book. I asked her if I could share how God brought healing in my heart with her 2 congregations, so they too could experience healing. "That'll be great, because they're still grieving," she said. In a board meeting when Keith's name was mentioned, people were in tears. "I would love to have you come and share your story. It will help them." This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 2. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 3. On February 1st, 2009, about 6 months after my husband's accident, I shared the following testimonial sermon at Community United Methodist Church in Keansburg and James Memorial UMC in Hudson, Colorado. Dancing in the Sky. Scripture. Jesus said to her, "I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this?" John 11:25-26. I'm here today because of all your support in my healing process, and I wanted to share how God brought healing to my heart from the loss of Keith. I thank you for helping me when I was going through a very difficult time. Many of you helped me with prayers, food, cleaning, hauling out garbage, writing thank you notes, moving, and so much more. I especially thank Reverend Dawn Marie, who has helped me very much in my grieving process. You helped me so much to heal, and God helped me step by step in my grieving process, which also brought healing. I will share how he did these wonders in my life. July 9th, 2008 was my day off, and I was home doing chores. Around noon, Keith asked me to take pictures of him riding his recumbent bike to add to his email devotion. I took many pictures of him. That evening, we were invited to a Special Olympics dinner at Adams County Fairgrounds at 6:30 p.m. Keith told me he would be done with Taekwondo class at 5:30 in the evening. I thought if I went with Keith, I might arrive late since I was asked to lead prayer for the meal. We decided to drive separately, and I left early. Keith didn't get there by the time the dinner started. I called him on his cell phone, but he didn't answer. He never showed up, and I thought he must have finished Taekwondo so late that he decided not to come. By the time I left the fairgrounds, it was about 8:30 in the evening, and while I was passing Highway 85 and 144th Avenue, I saw 2 police cars with their lights flashing. There'd been an accident. When I got home, there was a police car parked in front of our home. The police told me that Keith had been in a car accident and was transported to Denver Health that morning. I told them they had the wrong person because Keith was at home that afternoon. They checked his name and told me it was Keith. I thought Keith had been in only a minor car accident since he was never involved in any accident during our 30 years of marriage. Then the police officer got a call and said to me that Keith had died. I went into shock. I couldn't believe it. My friend Helen came with her son and took me to the hospital, with Jody and David joining us to lend their support. I was immersed in grief. We were planning to go to Montana for the McDonald's family reunion July 17th, and July 17th ended up being the date of Keith's funeral. I was immobilized with so much grief and pain that I couldn't work. There were many ways God brought healing, and the first day Keith died, God told me that Keith lived a full life. The Lord helped me to accept Keith's death, even though I didn't understand it. 3 days after he died, I asked the Lord to show me that he was taking care of Keith. That night I had a dream, and in this dream Keith came and bowed to me and said, "Thank you." Then he disappeared. That brought me so much healing. One Sunday I attended worship service in James Memorial United Methodist Church, and then I went to attend services at First Community United Methodist Church. I was so overwhelmed with grief that I couldn't stay to worship and left in tears. I went home and asked God for the first time, why do I have to go through this? Still, I wasn't able to go back to work because I was in so much pain. After 3 weeks, I attempted to lead worship at ACDF, but again, I walked out in tears. I was glad that I had an intern that day to lead worship for me. I was incapable of doing anything with my ministry or with the book projects. So my son Fletcher and I went to visit my daughter Nicole for 4 days in Wyoming. After we came back, I dropped Fletcher off at his apartment. While I was driving, I was listening to the song God of Wonders, which was one of Keith's favorite songs. Suddenly, I had a vision of Keith dancing in the sky with a big smile and making a big circle. I couldn't believe it. I was so happy to see him and thank God for the vision. I had wanted to take dancing lessons with Keith when he was alive. He told me he couldn't dance and he didn't want to take lessons. God displayed a sense of humor to show me Keith dancing so well and with a happy smile. This vision brought me so much healing. I thought if Keith is happy in heaven, I should be happy also. I was able to go back to work the next day and started sharing my story of how God brought healing into my grieving heart. Still, I was only functioning at 50% and had yet to go through much more mourning and grieving because healing is a process. I cried for 2 days while packing Keith's books and continued to cry when I packed up Keith's clothes and cleaned his bathroom. From then on, I suffered from triggers that caused me to grieve. Everything became a trigger, and I would break down. For example, when I saw a man who looked like Keith or saw a red truck, it would trigger my grief. When I saw a couple walking together, it was also a trigger. Keith's birthday was a trigger. Coming back to an empty home was a trigger. Any of Keith's friends would be a trigger. Even driving was a trigger. One day I found myself crying because I thought about how much pain Keith must have been in when he was hit by the other car. That almost immobilized my thinking process, and I turned left on a red light. I barely missed an oncoming car. Keith died when he was turning left and was hit by an oncoming car. I didn't know how to be healed from my grief. If it was up to me, I wouldn't have been healed. I made plans to grieve until I died because I lost the person I loved the most. One day I asked the Lord if there was anything that he wanted to tell me. He told me he could heal my broken heart, but I was not willing to let my husband go. He reminded me of my aunt who prayed to God to take away her thoughts about losing her deceased husband, and God healed her. She didn't have to grieve anymore. The day I closed on the new house, God told me not to bring Keith to my new home. God was preparing a new journey for me, but I was still not willing. I couldn't go into the new home the day I closed because I was not willing to let my husband go. Finally, I realized that I couldn't grieve anymore because it was so painful, and God helped me to realize that my grieving became a distraction in my walk with the Lord. Then God showed me a vision where I was tightly holding a clear plastic balloon shaped like my husband, and Jesus was standing by the door of my new house waiting for me. Jesus was ready to lead me into the next stage of my life, but I wasn't ready to follow him. God confronted me regarding my distraction from my spiritual journey with him because of my grieving. It was then I knew that I had to let go of all my plans to grieve for Keith. If I truly believed Keith was happy in heaven with Jesus, I shouldn't grieve. I prayed, God, I give all my desires, wishes, self-pity, regrets, dreams, and everything associated with my husband to you. Please take away any thoughts of sorrow associated with Keith and heal my grieving heart. I was then able to put my grief behind me and move into my new home after that. Since then, God worked yet another miracle. I haven't had any triggers, and I don't grieve anymore. I haven't broken down, not even once, because God took away my desire to be with Keith. I know he is with the Lord. God was helping me to accept that as well. Now, I only have good memories of Keith, and I can smile and enjoy my life. Of course, I cry at times when I share my pain, grief, and what I have gone through in this journey of loss. Now I rejoice that God has brought healing to my heart. Since God healed me, I was able to work on my book for the Transformation Project. Also, I started writing a book, Dancing in the Sky. I'm planning to publish 10,000 copies of this book by the end of May 2009, so I could distribute them to people who knew Keith, to jails, prisons, and homeless shelters throughout the United States, to help those who are grieving from the loss of their loved ones. Healing is a process, and God is still working with me in many areas. On December 26, 2008, God asked me to write a goodbye letter to Keith. Here's the letter. Dearest Keith, our Lord is amazing and loving. He has so much compassion to guide me in my grieving process. He has answered so many people's prayers, including my prayers as well as yours. God brought healing from grief when I lost you. I had to pray to let you go, since that was hindering my healing process. If I truly believe you are in heaven with Jesus, I shouldn't grieve, but rejoice. I was grieving, so God confronted me on this and directed me to change my heart so I can let you go. By the time I moved into my new home, God freed me from sorrow and pain. It's a miracle. He brought healing to my mind and heart. I plan to write a book on how God has brought healing in me. It's God's grace that I'm writing this without breaking down in tears. I'm thankful that He has directed and guided me in my grieving process. Even now, God asked me to write this goodbye letter to you. It's been 6 months since you left this earth and have gone to be with the Lord. He has healed me from losing you. I write this with great affection and love for you, knowing that you will be a great servant to God in heaven and give Him glory in every way. I'll try to do the same as long as I live. I made a decision to love the Lord. That's my first priority. I'll be depending on God to lead my ministry. I'm so blessed and thankful because God has been leading me in my walk, teaching me how to focus on Him, how to love and serve Jesus. I am grateful to you. You helped me in my preparation for ministry. You took the time to type all my papers when I attended Multnomah Bible College. I only typed one last paper before I graduated. God told me that you helped me in my ministry preparation process more than anyone, and I know it's true. I'm sorry I was not able to take you out for dinner after I received a check from the upper room for a weekly devotion I wrote. I thank God for you, and thank you for trying to be a good husband, even in our challenging situations and difficult times with our children. You were a good husband. I couldn't have asked for anyone better. If we were to live again, I would marry you again because I love you so much more than anyone else I've ever met. You brought so much healing in my heart and challenged me to grow in faith. You also prepared me for the challenges of everyday life by pushing me to be independent in every way. I thank you for that, and thank you for everything you have done to make me happy with your creativity and your sense of humor. I say goodbye to you because I can't hold on to you anymore. God teaches me that I have to give him everything that concerns me, including you, so I can devote myself to loving God, helping others who are hurting and in need of my care. Among them are our beautiful children, our families, and our friends who are still grieving your loss. I need to be a mom and a dad because you cannot take care of our children anymore. Pray for me for God's wisdom, knowledge, understanding, and revelation, so I can guide our children to experience God's love, power, and healing. Until I see you again, goodbye, and take care of God's business in heaven as I do here on earth as long as God will allow me. Thank you again for your love. Pray for me, our children, our family, and friends. I love you. Your wife forever, Yong Hui. These days I say, Jesus, I'm so happy with you. I'm in love with you. I couldn't say that when I was grieving, but now I can. God blessed me so much. One of the blessings happened through a dream not long ago. In this dream, Keith was serving a master. I believe this master is Jesus. When Keith saw me, he came and gently lifted me up to the high ceiling, and while he was putting me down, I said, I love you more than anyone. Do you know that? Keith was so touched. He embraced me tightly with affection. I felt his love, and then I woke up. Interestingly, Keith looked much younger than his age. He didn't have any wrinkles, and he was tall. Fletcher and I talked about how people look young in heaven. We laughed because if people are much younger looking than their age in heaven, Keith might have much more hair on his head. God helped me understand that he gave me the chance to tell Keith my last words to him, which I wasn't able to do before he died. I can tell the world about how God, who has so much love and power to heal our broken hearts. I know many people are grieving. It's time to give Keith to God so that we can focus on loving God and helping others who are hurting. My story of healing is a blessing from God, and I have the need to tell others what God can do. That's why I wrote Dancing in the Sky. God has blessed me so much with this book already, and the many inmates who are editing it have experienced healing. That's God's grace working in us all. Thank you for giving me the chance to share my testimony. Thank you for carrying my burdens when I needed help the most. God bless you. Let us pray that God will bring healing in the areas that need healing. After the service, I received many encouraging comments, and many people told me that my story brought healing to their hearts. Later, this message was sent to 6 more congregations that Keith had served during his 21 years of ministry. The day my book was finished, God told me to make a DVD to help grieving people. I produced Dancing in the Sky, Mismatched Shoes, with my husband's last congregation. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 3. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 4. I discovered that there are 4 areas in which I needed to find peace as part of my grieving process. Peace with God, myself, my husband, and with other people. I found peace with God, my husband, and myself, but I didn't have the chance to make peace with the people who were involved in the car accident with Keith. My husband made a mistake turning left, and there was an oncoming car. There were 3 teenagers in the other car. They were all hurt, and one was seriously injured. About 9 months after my husband's death, I received a card and letters from them. This is what I received. Sorry about your loss. I hope you can forgive, and sorry about my writing. I have a cast on my arm because of the accident. We are all sorry about the whole thing. CJ. I'm 14 years old. I was one of the boys in the other car that collided with Mr. McDonald's truck. I'll never forget when the 2 cars collided. That was probably the worst, most horrible thing I've ever experienced. I got the worst out of it from everyone in our car. I was hospitalized for 2 weeks. I would tell you what all happened to me and all I had to go through, but it's too long to write on a piece of paper. I'm terribly sorry about your loss. We all feel really bad. When we found out, we all started crying. My friend found out before I did. I didn't find out till around 2 hours later, right before I was going into surgery. I wish there was something we could all do to help out. We feel really bad about the whole thing just because of the fact that it's our first accident and someone passed away. I know this card isn't going to make you happy about your husband, but I hope it helps you feel a little bit better. Hope you're doing better. Omar. I was the driver of the other car. I'm 17, turning 18 on the 25th of September. I'm really sorry about everything that's happened. I wanted to let you know if I could have done anything to prevent that from happening, I would have. I'm doing better now. I had a fractured collarbone that is recovering. I wanted to let you know if there's anything that we can help you with, we all would be more than happy to do what we can. We were going to hand deliver our notes and cards, but my mom said it might be too much for you to handle. I hope you are doing good. Sorry about your loss. When I found out that your husband passed away, I felt terrible and I cried because I thought it was my fault for his passing. Sincerely, Jay. After I read these letters, I was touched by their thoughtfulness, but I felt like I was reliving my grief again. I never thought that I would go through so many tears after I'd experienced healing, but I did. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 4. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 5. I cried for many days after I received their letters. I wasn't ready to respond to them at that point, but I felt bad that the driver of the other car was suffering from guilt which was not his fault. I asked my friend Laura to write a letter on my behalf. To her credit, she told me I needed to write it myself. She said, "They don't need to hear from me. They need to hear from you." I was praying for these young people's healing when God helped me to write a letter, May 11th, 2009, 10 months after my husband's death. The following is the letter I wrote to the driver of the other car. Dear Jay, thank you so much for the card and the letter. The day I received the card and read your letters, I was flooded with tears. I was crying more than the day my husband died. I was in such shock when I first found out my husband had died that I didn't feel anything. Now I'm more aware of what it means to lose someone, and that makes it hard. There are many things in life I wish hadn't happened. This accident is one of them. What made me sad is that one mistake can take a person's life and can cause so much pain in others. You and your friends are very kind to write letters to me. You are still in pain and traumatized, yet wanted to help me. Your mom was right. I'm not ready to see anyone who would remind me of my husband's death. In fact, I didn't think I was ready to respond or write a letter to you at first. I felt like I was reliving my pain and grief. I asked my friend to write a letter on my behalf. I was told that I needed to write it, and so I asked God to help me. I felt really bad about what happened to you three, especially you. I can't imagine how anyone went through what you've gone through, even though it wasn't their fault. Anyone who was involved in an accident would feel bad if someone died. I'm grateful no one else died as a result of this accident, even though you are still struggling with pain and recovery. Let me assure you I have no harsh feelings toward anyone about my husband's death. In fact, I feel bad that you have to go through this painful guilt trip which you don't even deserve. My husband made a mistake which cost him his life. I ask for your forgiveness on his behalf because if he hadn't made a mistake, you three wouldn't be in pain. I'm sure my husband feels bad about what happened to you. I know his heart. He would have helped you in any way he could. There was no way he would have hurt you. However, he made a mistake and unintentionally hurt you and your friends. Please forgive him. I pray that God will bring healing to you and your friends. I struggled a lot after my husband passed away, but I have many supportive friends, and God has helped me. I'm able to go on with my life, though I still have more grieving to go through. There will be 2 different memorial services for my husband in June when all the pastors from Montana and Colorado get together. In July, my family's going to take my husband's tombstone to a cemetery and will spread his ashes. I know this summer is going to be very difficult for me, my family, and many people who knew my husband. I thank God that I'm surviving this. I have faith in God that He will help me get through it. God helped me write a book about my story of grief and healing called Dancing in the Sky. It'll be published and will be coming out within a month. This book will help others who are grieving. God also helped me write a brochure to help others who are grieving. If you three would like to receive the book, please let me know. I'll be happy to send one to each of you. I'm enclosing the brochure in case you'd like to read it. It may help you recover from this horrible experience. In the brochure, I talk about making peace with everyone. I have already made peace with God, with myself, and with my husband. One area I haven't been able to make peace yet is with those who were involved in the car accident. You and your friends asked me what you can do to help. Actually, the card and letters you and your friends sent me helped me a lot, even though I shed more tears. Knowing there are people who are hurt but go beyond their own pain to think about others' pain and try to do something to relieve it gives me hope. Your letters brought healing to me. I'd like to know whose idea it was to send a card and letters to me. It took lots of courage and wisdom to do it, and it helped me. If any one of you would like to meet me in the future, I'll be glad to meet with you. You may call me and leave a message. I'll get back with you. Even though I'm sad that my husband can't be with me anymore, I gave him to God in prayer, and God has helped me. You all can let go of him as well. Ask God to help you with this terrible memory so God can help you experience emotional and mental healing. What will also help me recover is to know that you three young people will not be discouraged by this horrible accident, and that you'll eventually recover and come out stronger with God's help. I will be continuously praying for your healing and recovery. I wanted to write a separate letter to each of you, but this letter covers it all. Would you please give your 2 friends a copy of this letter along with the brochures? Their copies are enclosed. I want them to know that I appreciate their letters and concerns, and they don't have to worry about me. I have many people who support me, and I have faith in God. Thank you for your letters, and God bless you. Yong Hui McDonald. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 5. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 6. I sent the letter, but it was returned unopened. I only had one person's address, so I couldn't send it to the others. I thought I had done my part, so I let it go. However, in December of 2009, about 1.5 years after the accident, the Lord asked me to contact these 3 young people. I had already processed my grief and moved on, but these young people were still hurting by the accident. I had no doubt that they were traumatized, and this could affect them the rest of their lives. They needed healing as well. Also, I needed to make peace with those who were involved in my husband's death. I contacted victims' advocates in Brighton and told them that I'd like to meet the 3 young men who were involved in a car accident with my husband. I asked them to make arrangements so I could meet with them if they would like to meet me. I asked them to give the young people my letter, my book Dancing in the Sky, and Dancing in the Sky Mismatched Shoes DVD as well. The meeting occurred in April of 2010, 22 months after my husband passed away. It was a very emotional day for me, but God knew we all needed to process this traumatic experience to obtain healing and closure. I was able to meet them with their mothers present. My son Fletcher wasn't ready to meet them because he was still grieving, but he came to support me. I was glad he came because he needed to process grief. I thought this meeting would give all of us closure. I thanked them for the letters they sent me and asked them to forgive Keith, because if he hadn't made those mistakes, they wouldn't have been hurt mentally, emotionally, and physically. They told me they had already forgiven him, and they felt so bad and wanted to attend my husband's funeral, but they didn't know how I would have felt, so they didn't come. I was encouraged and touched by their kindness. I asked them whose idea it was to write letters to me. I discovered it was the one who was the most seriously injured. I thanked them for their courage and compassion. Meeting these young men provided closure to my grieving and healing process. However, I was troubled by how much these young men were struggling because of the accident. These young men gave me hope of seeing goodness in others. The next time we met, we shared more about the accident and what we all went through, and we had many wonderful conversations. There was no way I would have thought about meeting these young people because they were a reminder of my loss. But God knew it was necessary for me to meet them. We had to process the hurt, pain, and trauma caused by the accident. As I listened to them, I had the opportunity to learn more about God's goodness through them. It's easy to look into our own pain and loss and forget about the pain and suffering of others. But God wants us to go beyond our pain. When God leads us to do something, we may not be ready to do it, but if we obey Him, it's always for our own good and the good of others. This experience proved to me that God really wants to bring healing to everyone. Praise God. Paul wrote, "Make every effort to live in peace with all men and to be holy. Without holiness no one will see the Lord. See to it that no one misses the grace of God, and that no bitter root grows up to cause trouble and defile many." Hebrews 12:14-15. It's important that we make peace with everyone and help each other experience God's grace. These young people helped me to experience God's grace. I thanked God for them. My suffering was small compared to what these young men were going through, because God already brought healing in my heart. They're still processing grief, and some still live in physical and emotional pain. But their goodness spoke loudly to me, giving me hope. I saw good things could come out of tragedies, and I thanked God for putting 3 angels in my path. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 6. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 7. I've learned a lot about grieving and healing. I started Grief Pathway Ventures, LLC, to reach out to others who are immobilized with pain from grief and loss. I've been helping many who are grieving with the many lessons I've been taught by the Lord, especially how to process grief and find step-by-step ways of healing. I started producing more books to help others who are grieving. The first book was on suicide, and the Lord asked me to reach out to veterans as well. So I started a nonprofit, 2 Veterans, 2 Fish Foundation, to help veterans and veterans' families to produce and publish books to help other veterans. In 2011, about 3 years after the accident, the Lord gave me another assignment. This time He asked me to gather stories from the 3 young men who were involved in the accident with Keith. I met them and told them I had no idea why God was asking me to do this, but all I knew was He had plans to add their stories to a future book. I asked them if they would write their stories, and they all said if it would help me, they wanted to do it. Actually, I was just obeying the Lord's leading. As I was listening to their stories, I gained more understanding of what these young people went through. It gave me more insight of what others go through after accidents, especially when it's not their fault. I was glad that God asked me to gather their stories. I felt closer to them as I was listening to their stories. Out of the 3, I was able to gather 2 stories, Omar and Jay. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 7. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 8. Omar's Story. I used to be an athlete. I used to play basketball and run track. Since I was 11 years old, I would go skating every weekend. Jay and CJ were my friends for many years, even though they were older than me. I was 14, CJ was 16, and Jay was 17. After Jay started driving, we started going out of town. CJ and Jay bowled in a league every Wednesday at a bowling alley in Thornton. July 9th, 2008 happened to be a Wednesday. We were on our way to the bowling alley, but never made it. I was with CJ all day that day, and when we met Jay, he told us that his car was fixed and tuned up, so we were going on a test drive. As soon as we started south on Highway 85 in Brighton, a red truck turned right in front of us. It happened so fast, I was frozen with fear. The only one who reacted was Jay. He slammed on the brake, hoping the car would stop in time, but the car was too close. I heard boom, and that's when the car came to stop. I felt pain in my stomach, as if someone punched my stomach and the blood was coming out of my mouth and nose. I was in the back seat. CJ and Jay came out from the front seat and opened the door for me. As soon as I opened the door and took a step out, I saw the red truck had landed on its side. The truck was on top of the driver. At that moment, I couldn't believe it was all happening. I felt like I was watching a movie. I stood on the side of the road, but was having a hard time standing up. Jay asked me if I was okay. I said I was okay. Then Jay went over to the other car and told me that he thought that the other driver was dead. Shortly after Jay told me that, the police came and people unflipped the truck and got it off the driver. At that moment, Jay told me the other car driver was dead. Then paramedics came and started working on the driver of the other car. They managed to bring his pulse back, and Flight for Life took him to the hospital. At that moment, I started feeling lightheaded and my eyes got blurry. The second fire truck and ambulance came, and I collapsed. The paramedics ripped my clothes and put the brace on my neck, then told me that I was in bad condition and that the helicopter was coming to get me. I told them no, and they canceled the flight, and they took me and CJ to the hospital in an ambulance to Children's Hospital in Aurora. They took Jay to Platte Valley Hospital in Brighton. I was hoping the pain would go away, but as time passed, it got worse. Before I knew it, I couldn't take it anymore. In the ambulance, they injected pain medicine in my arms, but it didn't work. I lost lots of blood, and they put an IV in my arm. I was going into shock. I felt so weak and was getting scared. My eyes started closing, and I thought I was dying. The paramedics kept slapping me on the cheek to keep me awake. I remember CJ was telling me that he loved me. He may have thought that he was losing me, so he had to tell me that. I was overwhelmed with what was happening. At that moment, I didn't really feel that love, but I told him I loved him too. I remember everything while they were taking me to the hospital. When we arrived at the hospital, they took me into a room, took an X-ray, and did an MRI to see what was happening. They got the results within 20 minutes and said that the impact of the seatbelt tore up my intestine, so I needed to go into surgery immediately. They had to open my belly because I had eaten before the accident. The food was all over inside my body. They had to clean it all out before they could cut into the torn part and repair my intestine. After the surgery, I woke up in the ICU and saw my mom standing there. I was in so much pain. They told me to press the morphine button whenever I needed to ease my pain. The first time they asked me to press the button, the medicine made me feel so weak, but the pain was still there, so I never pressed the button again. I was in the ICU for 3 days, and then went to a recovery room. They had a tube through my nose to clean my stomach and a tube to feed me. At this point, I wasn't able to eat. They had to make sure that my stomach and intestines would work. They were giving me the IV fluids, and they kept cleaning my stomach. The nurse told me that if I can process the food, I could go home. So they listened to the movement of my stomach and intestine every day. 3 or 4 days later, they told me I had an infection from my surgery. So they were going to open up the surgical wound to clean it. They tried to put me to sleep by forcing the needle in my hand. It was so painful. They said the medicine would burn. As soon as the needle was injected, I felt the burning sensation traveling through my arm. It was as if someone torched my arm. My arm felt weird, so I started to move my arm. Then they put the oxygen mask on my face, and I kept trying to push it away. They told me I would feel like I was floating. After a while, I felt like I was floating, and I don't remember after that. The next day, they came to clean my belly where they'd opened it. They didn't tell me that they hadn't sewn it this time. When they were cleaning it, I saw my stomach, and I was in shock. I looked down, and, "What is that?" I said. I was told the doctors didn't sew my belly muscle because if they sewed it, there was more chance of infection. They wanted my wound to heal from the inside out naturally. I couldn't believe that I was in the hospital. I couldn't move. I couldn't eat. They took out all the tubes after 6 days. They listened to the movement of my intestine on the 8th day, and they told me they heard the movement. I couldn't eat until the last day I left the hospital. After that, they cleaned my wounds and sent me home with the stuff to clean myself at home. I was discharged after 9 days. The first time I went to take a shower at home was when I saw my stomach open. I felt sick, and I couldn't stand it. I couldn't take a shower, so I had to wait until the next day. I had to use the sanitizing water on my stomach. I pulled something in my neck from the impact of the accident when the car was hit. I had to be careful about my movement because I lost so much blood from the accident. They had to give me blood while I was in surgery. My skin tone was yellowish when I got home. 2 weeks after I got home, when I went to the bathroom, I fainted. I felt so weak, but I still attended school. It was hard getting around, so I couldn't go out for about 4 months. 3 months after I got home, the doctor told me that my belly was completely healed. After I got out of the hospital, CJ and I reflected on our conversations in the ambulance, and that really hit me. At the time, I didn't have feelings of love for him, but now I do feel I love him. I discovered the driver who died in the car accident lived in Keansburg, and his name was Keith. It was March 2009, about 8 months after the accident. I visited my 7th grade science teacher, Mrs. Aden, who had told me that she used to live in Keansburg. I wanted to ask her if she'd known Keith. She said yes, so she asked me if I knew him. I told her I was in the other car when the accident happened. At that moment we started talking about the accident, and the idea came that if we wrote letters, Mrs. Aden would be in charge of getting the letter to Keith's wife, Yong Hui. So I talked to Jay and CJ, and they said they'd do it. Within a week all the letters were ready, and we gave them to my teacher. After that we just waited for a response, but we didn't get any response. Then, after a year of sending the letters, we got a phone call from the Brighton Police Department saying that Yong Hui wanted to meet with us. At first I wondered why she wanted to meet us. I still felt that we were the reason her husband died, so I couldn't understand it. I thought any other person would have been mad at us. All of us talked about it. We thought, if anything, she's the one who should not want to meet us. We talked about it and decided we just want to talk about the whole situation to get it off our chest. All our moms wanted to come, and my mom had to be there because I was only 16 years old at the time. Overall, I was nervous about the meeting. As the meeting was going on, we got to know each other. I realized that there are good people in the world. We just wanted to know why this accident had happened. We didn't know Keith was going somewhere in a hurry, and we found out all the little things that led up to the accident. So after the meeting, we understood what had happened, and this answered the questions we had. How did I deal with this accident? I think everything happens for a reason. I can't do any hard physical activity, and I can't play any sports anymore. I have to live with pain still, and my side was bothering me a while back. So I have to be careful about my body movement. I wanted to be a police officer, but with my physical condition, I had to give it up. My mom acts normal around me, but all my relatives told me my mom was scared and crying a lot. She still worries about me, but she's doing well. I was never into church, and then slowly I started getting into it. Then there was a time I went to church by myself when I was 16, actually paying attention to Mass, and I learned that all the stuff applies to us. I used to go to church all the time, but lately I'm working on the weekends, so I don't get to go to church. I just pray, and I believe God is still there, and He will always help me no matter what. I live one day at a time, and I try not to worry about the future too much. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 8. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 9, Jay's Story. The day of my car accident, I spent the whole day with my mom. My mom and I went and got the license plates for our car. We just bought a new car 2 months before the accident. The day of the accident, I was so happy because I found out some cool things about the car, and I was going to spend some time with my friends Omar and CJ. I was driving us to the bowling alley that day because I was bowling on a league at the time. After I picked up Omar and CJ from CJ's house, we were on our way to the bowling alley. When we got on the highway, we were talking about the cool stuff I found out about my car. Then seconds later, we collided with the other vehicle. After the accident, when I gained control of what was going on, I asked Omar and CJ to get out of the car if they could. If not, I would be back to help them after I checked on the other people. I walked up to the other vehicle and pounded on the roof of the truck since the truck was on its side after the accident. I got no response. I did it again, but still no reply, so I walked to my car to check on Omar and CJ. By the time I got back, they were both out of the car. Then I saw the cops and fire trucks everywhere. I saw some people trying to push the truck onto all fours. My family was in shock after they found out I got into a car accident. Once they showed up at the scene, I didn't realize it at all. I was on a stretcher by the time my mom came over to see me and held my hand and told me that I was going to be okay. I couldn't tell my mom anything because she wouldn't let me talk until she was done talking to me. Once I got the chance to say something, I said, "I'm sorry, Mom." "Why are you sorry?" she asked. I then said, "For wrecking your new car after having it 2 months. Then I got it totaled out." She told me not to worry about it. "A car can be replaced," she said, "but you can't be." Once I told Omar and CJ sorry and told them I love them. We were all rushed to the hospital. CJ and Omar went to Children's Hospital of Aurora. They took me to Platte Valley Hospital. I had visits from my family right away and a couple of hours later. I had some real friends come and visit me, too. I didn't really want to see anyone except my family and friends, CJ and Omar, to make sure they were okay. When I was released from the hospital, I had to get the report from the accident scene. I had to send my mom in for me because I could barely walk. When my mom came back with the report, I asked her if they told her anything about the other driver from the accident. She ignored me, and I asked again. She finally told me that he didn't make it. I broke down in tears because I felt horrible. I felt like it was my fault for his passing. I didn't know what else to do. I felt I was responsible for the accident, for the death of the other driver, and for my friends being in the hospital with injuries. The day after the accident, my mom called my house and told me to get ready because I was going to the hospital with CJ and my sister and CJ's family to visit Omar, who was still in the hospital. When CJ's family came and got us, I was nervous because I didn't know if CJ's family was upset with me or not. I sat down in CJ's mom's car, and she came over and gave me a hug. I felt that everything was all right from his family. I didn't feel hate or anger from anyone at all. Once we got to the hospital, I started to get very nervous about seeing Omar's mom and sister. I didn't know what to expect. When I saw Omar's sister, she gave us a hug. I saw Omar's mom walking out to the waiting area. She was in tears, and I didn't know what to do. I was told to hug her, and I really didn't want to. Why do I have to? But everyone said, "Go, do it. You'll feel better about doing it." I took my sister with me. Once my sister and I gave Omar's mom a hug, I felt so much better. I asked how she was doing. She said she was doing good. She was very emotional, but what mother wouldn't be? I asked how long I was able to visit Omar. "They have to do a check on him," she said, and after they did the check, one of the nurses came and asked who would like to see him next. I didn't want to go at all. I was so scared to see my best friend in a hospital bed with all kinds of things hooked up to him. Everyone said, "Just go, you need to go." So I went with CJ and my sister. Once I got into the room where Omar was and had seen him, I felt okay until I started to ask him how he was doing. He looked at me and then smiled and tried to grab my hand. When I grabbed his hand, he was like a little doll. He couldn't move or talk. It was a very short answer from him. He wanted to ask me a question. I said, "Go for it, bro. Ask me anything." He asked how I was. "I'm all right," I responded. "I'm more worried about you." Once I said that, I broke down in tears. When I was getting ready to leave, he asked us a question. "What's the most important thing to us?" "I'm guessing you're saying a cell phone," I replied. "Well, you're right," he said. He asked me to bring his cell phone when I come to see him again. I laughed when he asked me that. I told him I would if I was able to find his phone. I made it my mission to find his phone, and I was able to do just that. We left the hospital after everyone got to visit with Omar. When we left, my mom called CJ's mom and asked if we could meet so we could all talk and then get our stuff out of the car from the tow yard. We all ended up going to the tow yard. When we were walking up to our car, my mom said, "That's not our car." "There's no way that's the car my son was in." I replied, "Well, it is, Mom." My mom and I removed our stuff from the car. I was going through the car with 6 stitches in my knee and a fractured collarbone. I was in some pain, but I didn't care. I was worried about getting Omar's phone like I said I would. Once I did that, I got all the other stuff for my mom. When I was done getting everything, my mom wanted to take pictures of the car to show my family and friends. My mom, my sister, and I went home to get ready for when my dad got home. Once he got home, we left to go see Omar again. When we got to the hospital, my sister and I had to show my parents what to do because we'd already been there that afternoon. We saw that Omar's mom was still there, but she was getting ready to go home. She gave my family a hug, and we talked for about 15 minutes. Once she left, the nurse came out and asked who wanted to go first. I told my mom and sister to go. "No, go with Dad so you can see your friend," my mom said. So my dad and I walked in, went to Omar's room, and found him watching a movie. I looked at Omar and said, "What's up, bro?" He was kind of out of it because the nurse just gave him his painkillers. I told him I found his phone and it was charged up for him. He had a small smile on his face when I gave him his phone. My dad was asking him questions. Then the nurse came and told us our visit was up. I was getting ready to walk out of his room when he said thank you and told us he loved us. We left so my mom and sister could go in to see him. My mom said, "No, I don't want to," because she knew she would cry. I told her, "It's going to be fine. He's almost asleep anyway. Just go see him." She finally went to see him. When they were done with their visit, we left. I asked my mom how she was, and she said she was good. She was glad she went to see him. Since the accident, I haven't had any nightmares or anything that reminds me of the accident. The hardest thing to handle afterwards was seeing 2 of my friends with injuries, especially seeing Omar in the hospital. The second hardest thing is the fact that I totaled out my mom's new car. I love cars, so every time I see a wrecked car, it's a bad thing for me. I felt bad for my mom. She went through just as much as I did. I was also upset because 6 months after the accident, I got shot 3 times in the face. The reason is because I started hanging out with some gang members, and while taking them somewhere, I was the one who ended up getting shot. When I got shot, I didn't know what to do or how to act. I was never really in trouble with the law until the shooting. I started to get pulled over more for speeding and stuff like that. In 2010, I got a phone call from the police department regarding the car accident. They asked me to go and meet with Mrs. McDonald, Omar, and CJ. "Sure, not a problem," I said. "I'd like to meet up with everyone." When I told my mom, she wanted to go as well. Before we met Mrs. McDonald, we all received some books and the DVD about the accident, and we all watched the DVD before reading the books. We met at the police station where all 3 of us came with our moms. They all wanted to be part of it, which was great. When we walked in, we saw someone standing in the waiting room, and she asked if I was Jay. "Yep, that's me," I replied. She said, "All right." Then we went and sat in a room and started introducing ourselves while we waited for the others to show up. Once the last person arrived, we began meeting. It was pretty nice having all of us there. Mrs. McDonald asked questions, which we answered. Mrs. McDonald offered us some other books she had written along with a DVD she made. It was a great time meeting with Mrs. McDonald. After the meeting, we split up so us boys could go enjoy the rest of the day. Omar, CJ, and I talked about how nice it was to know Mrs. McDonald was doing better now. We felt closer to her and each other since we went through this accident together. The more we met with Mrs. McDonald, the more we felt closer to her, to each other, and to the family. How did the accident affect me? The accident affected me because every time I went by the accident scene, I tensed up like I was going to be in another accident. After doing that for about 1.5 years, I no longer do that. One of the things I had to process was how to forgive. I had to deal with people saying I killed him. I was upset, so I just went out and drove my car out of control. I was speeding everywhere I drove. I didn't care about anything I did in my car. I also bullied people, saying I'd beat the crap out of them. After people learned what happened, they came up and apologized to me for saying that I killed someone when it wasn't true. They asked questions about what happened, if I was all right from the accident. I always said yeah, just for them to leave me alone, because I didn't want to talk about it. About 9 months later, I never really talked about the accident because I was trying to move on. People ask how it has affected me. I say not too much. I still drive like I used to. To this day, I still do everything I was doing then. I feel bad when I think about how I yelled at people and put other people's lives at risk. So if you've seen me yell or seen me drive insane, I'm sorry. One of the things I can say I learned from this accident was how to help others who've gone through similar things. I was able to tell my story to some that are dealing with the same things. After I was able to reach out and help, I felt better knowing I had helped someone else. I met another person who told me he was getting blamed for killing someone too. I explained that it wasn't his fault. It was the other person's fault because of what he had done. I now know that I can't judge someone because I would be doing the same thing that was happening to me. Everyone is only human, and nobody is perfect, and we all make mistakes. So, if you've realized that you're one of these people, please reach out to others and help them out. How did God help me process things? God helped me and my family through this by keeping us close. I have had little faith in God, but came to realize that He allows things you would never think of. I'd like to speak out to all the people that have gone through some of the things I've experienced. If you don't process things after a tragic accident or death, you can be traumatized for the rest of your life. You need to take time to process things. I've always said what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, so live every day of your life like it's your last, and go day by day. I processed things by talking to family members and friends. I also started to write things down to help me process them. I also found it helpful to go to the mountains at night to think and process things. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 9. Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 10. Alex and Pete's Story. I was able to learn a lot about how the lives of 3 young men could be affected by one accident. I was grateful they shared their story. It helped me understand what they have gone through in more ways than I could have imagined. I also had more understanding of what their mothers felt going through this tragic accident. I'm thankful Jay and Omar shared their stories, even though it was hard for them. They did it for me, and they also taught me a lot about goodness in people. I'm thankful for their kind hearts. I told Jay that he helped me a lot by sharing his stories and how he helped me see how mature he is. How could a young person go through a serious accident and come out strong and help others? Jay was doing it. Just when I thought I was finishing this book, God helped me to meet 2 people who blessed me with their stories. On May 6, 2012, I met Alex and Pete in the hallway of the Adams County Detention Facility. When they learned who I was, they had some answers to what I've been asking. I believe the Lord wanted me to share their stories with others as well, so I added their stories here. Here's Alex Vihil's story. Pete, Ray, and I were going south on Highway 85, and the car in front of us was black. Then I saw a truck on the left coming from the east. The driver stopped at the stop sign, then he continued as if he didn't see the other cars. "They're going to get hit," Pete said, and they hit. The black car T-boned the side of the truck. The truck rolled about 2.5 times and hung up on a fence, and it came to rest upside down. Almost immediately, an off-duty police officer was on the accident scene. I saw the driver, Keith, in the driver's seat upside down. His seatbelt was still on, tightly fastened on his neck. We couldn't get him out, so we flipped the truck. The police officer cut the seatbelt and got him out. I tried to get his pulse, but he didn't have any pulse. I thought his neck was broken by the way his head was moving. His eyes were open, his face had a happy smile, and he seemed to be looking straight at me. I was in shock when I saw his empty eyes. I knew he was gone. Soon the fire truck and police came, and they were talking for a while before they started CPR. I still wonder even today if I should have done CPR while we were waiting. Maybe he would be alive today if I had done CPR. I'd taken a week of Red Cross training from my previous employer. I have kids, and I wanted to be able to save my kids if anything ever happened to them. Why did he miss seeing the oncoming car? At that time of day, the sun was going down. I think the sun blinded him. He couldn't see the oncoming car. One day, about 6 months after the accident, I saw Keith's wife, Mrs. McDonald's newspaper article about her husband's accident. I sent her a letter. This is what I wrote. Dear Mrs. McDonald, my name is Alex V. I was touched by your story in the newspaper and felt I needed to share something with you. I was behind the car that hit your husband and was first on the scene with your husband. I just want you to know that I don't think he felt any pain when he passed because it was so quick. When I got to the truck, it was upside down, so 4 other people and I turned it over with the help of a policeman. Your husband just seemed to be staring at me with a little smile on his face. I checked his pulse and breathing, but I couldn't find any. I think he was already looking at Jesus. I always wanted to contact you, but I didn't know if it would be appropriate. I feel very sad for you and your family. He seemed like a very giving and loving person. May God bless you all, and I hope this might help in your healing. Sincerely, Alex V. Hill. I sent the letter to her, but the letter came back to me. I wondered if I would ever be able to tell her what I wanted to say. I still feel that chill when I drive by where the accident took place, and I'm still bothered by it. It was a violent car wreck. I just needed to tell her that Keith left with a smile on his face. Over the years, I've seen a lot of wrecks. One time I helped a guy whose head was badly hurt. I thought he wouldn't make it, but he made it. I've seen many accidents on the road and was actually able to help a few people. But Keith's accident bugged me the most because I could see his face in my mind all the time, especially at the location where the accident happened. This one was not like the other accidents because Keith was gone and I couldn't do anything about it. I almost died a couple of weeks ago while riding on my motorcycle on Highway 52. Something told me to slow down as I was approaching the corner. Then I saw a man in a truck. He had his cell phone to his ear and was reading a newspaper while driving. I could see his eyes as he was turning. He lost control of the car and was heading into my lane. He was going 65 miles an hour, and I was on my motorcycle going 60 miles an hour. I thought he was going to hit me, but somehow he missed me. I couldn't figure out how I made it without being hit. After this incident, I was shaking. I still don't know how I made it. I consider I was dead that day. I've been sober for 5 months, and that's something that probably saved me. I don't trust any drivers after this incident, but I also understand that when God says it's time for you to go, you go. I was visiting Adams County Detention Facility for a contract bid. I was with Denny, a maintenance man, and when he was saying hi to a person, I asked who she was. He said, "That's a chaplain." I need to see her. I was at the scene when her husband died. I wrote to her, but the letter came back. So Denny called her, and I was able to tell her that Keith didn't suffer and that he had a smile on his face when he died. I also told her that what I think happened was that the sun blinded him so he couldn't see the oncoming car. I finally was able to tell what I wanted to tell her for so long. For me, this finally brought closure. I got the burden off my shoulders that day. We had always wondered if we would ever meet her. Pete Hernandez's story. After this car accident, I was in shock. When I went home, I cried. Whenever I pass the intersection where the accident happened, I feel awkward. I hold my breath because you never know what will happen the next moment. I've been in a few accidents, but this accident affected me a lot because of the way it happened. I've never seen anyone whose eyes were open when they died. For a short time, they did get his pulse back, but I knew he was gone as soon as we rolled the truck back and when I saw his eyes. Seeing his face bothered me, And since then, a couple of people in my family have passed away. My dad and grandson died. Their deaths brought back memories of Keith's accident, the death, and how they related to each other. I would say to everyone, slow down. There's no need to be in a hurry. You're going to get there sooner or later. I thanked Alex and Pete for helping my husband at the accident scene, and thanked them for reaching out to me for sharing their stories. Did my husband suffer? He had always been a careful driver, so how did he miss the oncoming cars? Those questions lingered in my mind for so long. Meeting Alex and Pete helped me to get some answers I needed. This book project has been good for me, even though at the beginning I resisted because I didn't feel I needed to go back and relive my grief and loss. God knew what's best for me. If sharing my stories of grief and healing would help others, I would share it. This ends Tornadoes of Accidents, Chapter 10.